The tomato crop is a highly demanded, water demanded species, and it is asking for a considerable amount of water entire its growing cycle. But however, it is the water requirements are different according to different stages of development. And as you can see from this graph here, the crop coefficients, we explained that the meaning of these coefficients when we talked about the irrigation of vegetable crops, is very low at the initial stage. It grows rapidly during the fast vegetative growth period of the plant, and it reaches its maximum and stand like this for a while, and this corresponds mostly with the period of intensive fruit growth. And then finally in late season there is a reduction, a significant reduction of this crop growth coefficient. But to be more specific about the tomato plant requirements for water, let's see these graphs which expresses the relationship between the relative yield decrease and the relative evapotranspiration deficit. So you can see there is a different response of tomato to the water stress, to water deficit at different stages of development. So for example, at the vegetative stage and also at the ripening stage, there are small small correlation coefficients, something like 0.4, which means that a slight reduction or light water stresses in this period will not have any significant effect on the final tomato yield. And this means that if we will have some need to save some water, of course we can do in this period. But keeping this in mind, that during the vegetative stage we do not have strong correlation coefficient, and we do not have a significant yield reduction because of the shortages of water, can be used in practice to avoid the two vegetative growth plants. Thus, in practice, we guarantee the stand establishment of tomato seedlings by fully irrigating the soil before transplanting, and then we irrigate again immediately after transplanting with some 1 or 1.5 liter per plant, and then we should leave the plants for a while without further irrigations, depending on the weather conditions and depending on the soil characteristics. It can be from a few days up to maybe more than a week or maybe 2 weeks, depending on, as I said, soil characteristics and weather condition. And by doing that, we force the plant to develop its root system and to make it deeper into the soil in order to reach the water reserves which are falling down. But then later on, during the flowering period and the yield formation, any water stress will have a strong negative effect on the yield of the plant, and this is understandable. The lack of water during the flowering period will cause a lot of flower drops, and therefore we will have only few fruits per plant. And next to that, during the yield formation, or which means during the intensive growth stage of fruits, the lack of water will make the fruits not to reach their optimum size and their optimum weight, and thus first by reducing the number of fruits per plant, and secondly by reducing the weight of individual fruits, will have a significant negative effect on the expected yield. And because of that, you shouldn't allow any kind of water stresses, during the flowering and intensive fruit growth stage. Otherwise, it will have consequences to expected production. Tomato is also a highly demanding nutrient crop, and also, like for the water, the demands are different, are changing according to different stage of development, tomato development. As you can see from this graph here, at the start, at the transplanting period, there are small requirements or expressed, which are expressed here as a gram per plant. But during the vegetative growth, the demands for nutrient elements are increasing quickly, and they reach their maximum at flowering and fruit setting. And this is especially true for nitrogen, which is in green here, and potassium. For the rest of other macronutrients, for phosphorus, potassium and calcium, we have only a slight increased demand during the flowering and fruit setting, but not similar to nitrogen and especially potassium. But to be more concrete in numbers, let's see this table here, which also expresses nutrient requirements of a tomato crop in kilograms per hectare according to different phenological stages. And you can see how they are changing from transplanting, gradually increasing from transplanting to flowering, fruit set, and reaching the maximum during the fruit setting and the start of harvesting. And this is true especially for nitrogen and potassium. But you can see that there is almost no change regarding the phosphorus, and it's a small increase, much smaller increase regarding to calcium. However, to the end, to have a good yield for a tomato crop, we need to provide about 275 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare and about 500 kilogram of potassium per kilogram. And easily you can observe that these both are the most important elements. There is only about 100 kilograms per hectare of phosphorus and similar amounts for magnesium and calcium. It's very important to note that potassium is the most demanding nutrient element. It almost double the amount of nitrogen, and there are especially very high demands of potassium fertilizers during the fruit setting and fruit ripening. Indeed, there is not any significant effect of potassium to increase the production, but there are very significant effects regarding the qualities of the production. And by increasing the amount of potassium this period, we might have better colored fruits with deep color. We'll have more firm fruits, better taste, more resistant to cracking, and more resistant to transportation, and to the higher vitamin C content and many other advantages, better aromas and things like that. And yeah, this is of course an estimation, and it can be as an orientation, to define the right amounts of fertilizer for each stage of development. Of course, you have to correct these values regarding with concrete situations of your greenhouses. I mean, you have to see what type of soil do you have, what is the fertility of the soil, what is the plant health, how is the plant health, is there competition with the weeds, or what are the weather conditions, and what is the quality of water, and many other things. But anyway, this table is very much informative about defining the fertilizers requirements for a tomato crop. Of course, the values here are expressed in kilogram per hectare of active ingredients and nutrient elements, and you need to convert each of these numbers here in specific fertilizers and a specific amount of each of the fertilizers you are going to use. The tomato plant can also be fertigated through the proportional method. By the proportional method, we explained these methods, the quantitative method, the first in the previous slide, and proportional method now are both explained in the lesson about the fertilization of greenhouse crops. But yeah, in case we are going to use the proportional method, we are also should differentiate the concentration of different elements according to the phenological stage of development, less during the task planting and establishment, and then gradually increasing it during the flowering, ripening, and harvesting. And I'm talking about, of course, nitrogen and potassium, but we keep the concentration of phosphorus always constant from the start until the end of fertigation. We of course can grow tomato in soilless systems also, and then we have to define a full recipe of macro and micronutrients, and you can use this table here as an guideline for preparing your own nutrient solutions in case of growing plants in artificial substrate. Then finally, we need to check out whether our nutrient solution are properly designed, and if we have proper concentration of different of specific elements, and if we have the right ratio between different elements, nutrient elements, and especially between nitrogen and potassium. The best way to check our fertigation program should be leaf analysis. Then we can use these values here of the critical concentration expressed in percentage of dry weather of each of these macronutrients at different stages of development: the fifth leaf, flower initiation, and fruit formation. Whether the concrete concentration of any of these nutrients, either nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and so on, fits with this guided this recommended concentration, then we have the right formulation of nutrient concentration, of right formulation of fertilizer doses. Otherwise, we have to either reduce or increase the content or the concentration of any specific nutrient elements. This is good. This sounds very good. In practice, there's not enough laboratories, and the farmers do not have enough funds, resources, opportunities to quickly test the leaf concentration of nutrients, and thus more often in practice we should rely on other indicators like plant performance, and we'll talk about this on to the end of this presentation, when I'll talk about physiological disorders, and among them we'll talk about physiological disorders due to the lack of any specific or excess of any specific nutrient element.